One of the most costly and aggravating problems plaguing naval aircraft today is corrosion. Initially, an aircraft is protected by the best paint job possible. But as soon as it's delivered to the fleet, that paint job starts wearing away. Salt spray, stack gases, and sulfur and chlorine compounds. In maintaining an aircraft's paint finish, it is frequently necessary to touch up, or in some cases, completely restore the finish due to corrosive attack. In this film, you'll see how naval aircraft are painted. We will examine the general procedures used in refinishing an aircraft and those used in touch-up situations. Refinishing an aircraft involves 3 basic steps. First, preparing the surface by removing the old finish. Second, pre-treating and priming the surface for painting. And finally, painting the surface. The most important step is to prepare the surface. Unless this is done properly, primers and paints may not adhere. Position the aircraft in a good physical location for stripping, preferably outside and in a shaded area. If work must be performed in direct sunlight, use water to cool the metal surface to be stripped. If stripping is done indoors, be sure there's adequate ventilation to remove the stripper's toxic fumes. The area selected must have water for rinsing. Steam cleaning equipment is also desirable for large-scale stripping operations. Check the paint legend. It's located on the fuselage under the right stabilizer. This legend tells you what paint system is in current use on the aircraft, the primer, and the type and number of finish coats, when it was painted, and who did the job. As there are specific strippers to be used for each of the various types of paints, check the current military specifications for the type recommended. Crew members mask off all parts of the aircraft not to be stripped. These include plastic canopies, wiring insulation, lubricated bearings, tires, or any opening that would allow the stripper to get into aircraft interiors or critical cavities. Once all required areas of the aircraft have been masked off, the next job is to protect yourself. The caustic stripper must not come in contact with your skin. Now, start removing the old finish. Apply a heavy coat of the stripper to the aircraft's surface. Make sure you cover all required areas of the aircraft. Allow the stripper to remain on the surface long enough for it to wrinkle and lift the paint film. At the end of this time, rinse off the stripper with fresh water and allow the surface to air dry. If there are areas where paint remains after initial stripping and rinsing, reapply the stripper and allow it to sit long enough to wrinkle and lift the remaining paint film. Then use a stiff bristle brush to work the stripper over the affected areas. Follow this with a water rinse. Continue this process until all of the old finish has been taken off. To remove paint remaining around areas inaccessible to the stripper, such as rivet heads and countersunk fasteners, use stiff bristle brushes and non-metallic scrapers. The final task in preparing the surface is to remove the residual oils and films left by the stripper. Use the free rinsing solvent as directed in the latest military specifications. When all paint has been removed, take off the masking paper and tape used in the stripping operation. The second step in refinishing an aircraft is to pre-treat and prime the surface. First, inspect all bare metal surfaces for signs of corrosion. If any is found, it must be removed by mechanical methods. Hand scrapers, abrasive papers, blast equipment, or power-driven aluminum oxide abrasive wheels can be used to do this. After the corrosion has been removed, clean the area involved with a free rinsing solvent. Use compressed air to remove any entrapped water or chemical. Now, reapply a surface corrosion inhibitor according to manufacturer's instructions. The type to be used is determined by the type of metal being treated. This is outlined in the aircraft structural repair manual. Use compressed air to remove any entrapped inhibitor. After the inhibitor has set for the specified time, use a free rinsing solvent to again clean the area. When the aircraft is completely clean and dry, priming procedures may begin. Remask all areas that are not to be primed. Currently, the paint system used on naval aircraft requires the use of an epoxy polyamide primer. This primer kit comes in two components. One is the primer pigment. The other functions as the hardener. Following the directions, mix the amount of primer that will be used for the day's operation. When more than one kit is to be used, only those kits manufactured by the same vendor should be mixed. That part of the mixed primer to be used for spraying operations must be thinned according to directions and allowed to stand for 1 hour prior to use. When the primer is ready, spraying operations may begin. Wear a respirator during these procedures to prevent inhalation of fumes. Apply the primer in one full coat. Be sure all areas are completely covered, but be careful to avoid excessive thickness. Once the aircraft has been primed, allow it to air dry for 1 to 2 hours. Small parts, such as throttle linkage rods or push-pull tubes, may be dipped to ensure coverage. Allow these areas and parts to thoroughly dry before continuing. The final step in refinishing an aircraft is to paint the surface. Although there are several types of paints used on naval aircraft, current military instructions recommend the use of a standardized paint system. In addition to the epoxy polyamide primer mentioned earlier, the system also consists of an acrylic lacquer top coat. First, prepare the paint. Next, thin that portion of the paint to be used for spraying according to the instructions on the paint container. Using a viscose meter, check for proper viscosity. In beginning painting procedures, first inspect the primed surface of the aircraft to be sure it is both clean and dry. Apply 2 full wet coats to the aircraft. Wear a respirator to avoid inhaling paint fumes. The first coat may be applied thinner than the final one. Once all areas have been covered by the first coat, allow it to dry for 30 minutes before applying the final coat. Once both coats have been applied and allowed to dry, use the brush or dip method on areas of the aircraft that could not be reached by spraying. After the aircraft has dried for approximately 3 hours, remove the masking materials from the aircraft and reapply the required insignia and squadron markings. Now, let's examine the procedures used in touch-up situations. Touching up an aircraft involves the same 3 basic steps as refinishing, except on a smaller scale. Prepare the surface, pre-treat and prime the surface, and paint the surface. Again, surface preparation is the most important of these steps. When the aircraft is in position, inspect the surface of the aircraft to determine the areas to be touched up. Scuff up the paint surrounding the area to be treated. Use either a 3 or 400 grit aluminum oxide paper or Scotch-Brite pads to do this. In the event a large area requires repair, mask the area and use stripping procedures to remove the damaged finish. After sand scuffing, remove the residue by cleaning the area with a properly thinned water emulsion type cleaner. Then rinse with fresh water. Use compressed air to remove entrapped water in areas of seams or gaps and allow it to air dry. The next step involved in touching up an aircraft is to pre-treat and prime the surface. When it is dry, apply the required corrosion inhibitor to the affected area. When the inhibitor has dried, clean the area again with solvent or water rinse. Apply a coat of primer. For small touch-ups, apply a very thin coat with a brush, and make sure you blend it into the old paint system. If the affected area were large, it should be masked off to the closest seam line and spray primed and painted. Once the primer coat has dried, painting procedures may begin. Apply 2 full wet coats of the required paint. The first coat may be put on thinner than the second, allowing a 30-minute drying time between coats. After the final coat has thoroughly dried, remove any masking materials used. If insignia or squadron markings were affected by the touch-up procedures, reapply them as necessary. In this film, you've seen the general painting procedures used to refinish and touch up an aircraft. A good intact paint finish is the most effective barrier that can be put between metal surfaces and corrosive attack. Although painting is an effective means of eliminating and correcting corrosion problems, it is only part of the solution. Inspection for corrosion and paint deterioration, as well as periodic washing, either on shore or with portable shipboard equipment, must also be a part of a continuous maintenance program. If these tasks are done well, corrosion can be effectively controlled and your aircraft maintained in a ready condition for much